everyone, hope you're all doing well. What is happening with Brazilians in 2025 when it comes to MMA? Because after last weekend, Thaleson Teixeira got finished by Derek Lewis in the first round in the first 40 seconds, and now that means that Brazilians are 0-10 in main event in 2025. Now granted, if you watch that fight between Derek Lewis and Thaleson Teixeira, well, there's a lot of people saying it was quite a controversial stoppage, whether it was too early or not, and I actually agreed. I thought it was too early until I saw Thaleson Teixeira using the fence, grabbing the fence in order to get back up. I feel like if you need to rely on the cage in order to get yourself up by grabbing it, then yeah, it's quite fair that it gets stopped. But regardless of that, they are now 0-10 in main events this year, and what's gone on for Brazilian MMA? Because not only are they 0-10 in main events, they currently only have one Brazilian champion, who is the flyweight champion Alexander Pantoja. And this feels weird saying this because to me, it's always felt like Brazilians have always kind of dominated when it comes to MMA. I mean, currently you still have Alexander Pantoja doing that in the flyweight division. He has a few title defenses and has been looking great in some fights as well. But even like the past, when you had the likes of Jose Aldo, Renan Barão, Fabricio Werdum, Anderson Silva, you had so many Brazilian fighters who were champions and doing really well. And in recent times, you've obviously had the Charles Olive era, and of course you had Alex Pereira doing great as well. But now we're in 2025, and yeah, Charles Oliveira's lost to Ilia Topuria and Alex Pereira's lost to Magomed Ankalaev. So this leaves the question, why are Brazilians doing so poorly this year in terms of MMA? And considering the main talking point is main events this year, let's go through these main events with Brazilians and see how they stack up. So the first main event of the year was Mackenzie Dern taking on Amanda Ribas 2 in a rematch, which is a fucking stinky main event, and Mackenzie Dern got the victory in this one. Now Mackenzie Dern, she does actually represent America, even though she does like the weird accent and all this shit. And Amanda Ribas, she did lose, and she was a slight favorite, -190, but it was quite an even contested fight going into it. It wasn't like she was a massive sizable favorite going into this one. For the second event of the year, we had Renato Moicano taking on Islam Makhachev on short notice, and let's be honest, no one was expecting Moicano to win this fight, and he was a massive underdog, so I think that's quite fair. That was a very hard matchup for the Brazilian in this one. We then had Gregory Rodriguez, Robocop, taking on Jared Cannonier, and this was an absolute banger, one of the most underrated fights of the year in my opinion. This was a great fight, and Robocop was actually quite a sizable favorite for this one going in against Jared Cannonier. He did have a lot of success, but ultimately his inexperience with longer fights kind of shafted him, and Cannonier was able to get the finish over him. So this one was a bit stinky considering it was a bit as a sizable favorite. I thought it was going to beat Cannonier as well. Still a hard fight though. Cannonier is no joke, and even though he's quite older, he's still really good. So this one was quite maybe harsh on the Brazilian, but nothing crazy. The Brazilian really should have won this one, especially with the amount of damage he was able to cause to Cannonier. Now we get to one of the bigger losses for Brazilian MMA when we get to UFC 313 when Alex Pereira lost to Magomed Ankalaev. Now I'm not going to take too much away from this one. This one was quite split down the middle. It was evens when it came to the betting odds, and again, a lot of people had either Ankalaev winning or Alex Pereira. It was very split down the middle and 50-50. I don't think you can take too much away from Alex Pereira in this one, but when you compare it to him having that great year in 2024, it doesn't look the best for him. But regardless, they are meant to be having a rematch later on this year. He is hoping at least, so maybe he can pull it back, but I'm not going to hold this against Brazilian MMA too much considering Ankalaev is very talented, and this was a very contested fight as well. And now we get to the next pay-per-view where we had Diego Lopez take on Alexander Volkanovski, where he was a slight underdog against Volkanovski. Now going into this, a lot of people thought that Diego Lopez was going to be able to catch Volkanovski, and he did, but he wasn't able to finish him. I don't think you can hold this one against Diego Lopez that much either, even though he didn't look the greatest. He still had his moments here and there in my opinion. It's just the fight IQ and not being able to solve the footwork of Volkanovski what really costed him in this match in my opinion. But regardless, I wouldn't hold this against Diego Lopez that much that he lost to an all-time great. I don't think there's any shame in that, even if it is an older version of Volkanovski. Volkanovski looked really good in this matchup. I wouldn't hold this against Brazilian MMA too much. Then next up, we had Carlos Prates take on Ian Gary, where he obviously lost. You hurt Ian Gary at the end of the round, but other than that, Ian Gary was just styling on him pretty much. He was an underdog going into this one, and it was short notice. I don't think he had the best of performances. I do think that comes to being quite green still against fighters who mix it in really well. Ian Gary did a good job of mixing in his takedowns, good fight IQ, and just tapping at range against Carlos Prates. Carlos Prates couldn't get anything going. Not the best of looks for Brazilian MMA in my opinion, considering Carlos Prates was meant to be this next big thing in the welterweight division, and he looked quite bad against Ian Gary. The next fight night event, we had Davison Figueiredo take on Corey Sandhagen, and Figueiredo obviously lost this one in the second round. His knee went all funny, and he was a sizable underdog in this fight. fight. He's a bit older, was coming off a loss to Piotr Jan as well. I don't think you can hold this against him too much. I think he's just getting a bit there up in age. And Corey Sandhagen, arguably in the prime of his career. Who knows? He's about to get a title shot as well. I wouldn't hold this against Figueiredo too much. He didn't look the best, I'll be honest, but the injury did play a part, and also him being up there in age. But this didn't look the best for Figueiredo in Brazilian MMA, in my opinion. But you got to remember, he was also a massive underdog, so he wasn't really expected to win this one. Now we get to an absolute demolition job when Gilbert Burns met Michael Morales in the main event. He was a massive underdog for this one. I actually thought the odds were a bit closer, but no. Michael Morales was a massive favorite against Gilbert Burns, and it showed in the fight when he blasted through Gilbert Burns. I don't think you can hold this against Brazilian MMA too much. Gilbert Burns, not really in his prime anymore. Much older. He hasn't really got it anymore. Michael Morales, a lot of momentum, undefeated, big hitter, very young, like 25, the same age as me. Ugh. And yeah, he just absolutely blasted through Gilbert Burns. I wouldn't hold this one against him too much either, to be completely honest, because Gilbert Burns was never really expected to win this one. Maybe make it competitive, but even still, he wasn't really expected to do much in this fight. And then we get to another big one, Charles Oliveira against Ilia Topuria. Who really thought Charles was going to win this one? Charles, I don't think anyone was really expecting him to win this one. Was coming off a win against Michael Chandler, so that's just whatever, really. And let's be honest, Charles hasn't really been in his prime for a while, in my opinion. I don't think this was a terrible loss. I mean, well, I don't think Ilia Topuria came up against a terrible Charles Oliveira necessarily, but it definitely wasn't the best version of Oliveira. I think we can all agree on that. The best version of Oliveira was like, what, 3-4 years ago, in my opinion, in the Olive era, and we didn't really get that. He did look awful. His game plan wasn't the best. Doesn't look the best for Brazilian MMA, but no one really expected Charles Oliveira to be the one to dethrone Ilia Topuria. The only people who were expecting it were Charles Glazers, who haven't taken a loss too nicely, but I understand why, because it wasn't a nice knockout. And then we get to now where Derek Lewis just finished Thaleson Teixeira, which means that Brazilians are 0-10 in main event in the UFC this year. And does this answer the question whether Brazilian MMA fighters have declined in 2025 and no longer that good? I disagree. I think given the context of a lot of these matchups, it's very easy to see that a lot of the Brazilian fighters like Gilbert Burns and Figueiredo are kind of at the end of their career, and a lot of the other fights were kind of 50-50 matchups where you could have gave a toss either way. There hasn't really been any Brazilian fighter this year other than like Gregory Rodriguez in a main event, who's kind of been a sizable favorite to win that main event. So I don't think it's very fair to say that all these Brazilians have all fell off all of a sudden and it's on the decline or anything like that, because when you actually read into context, there have been some very hard matchups for them. And how's it looking for the Brazilians in their next main event? Well, you have Johnny Walker taking on Zhang Ming Yang, so make of that what you will. But don't worry, Brazilians, because you have a guaranteed victory this year when Diego Lopez takes on Gene Silva at UFC Noche in September. At least you're finally going to get at least one win, so it won't end with an O, thankfully for you guys, but you're also going to get an extra loss as well with that outcome of that fight, unfortunately. But I feel like you also have to remember, we have had the fighting nerds doing very well as well. And you've had fighters doing very well who haven't been in the main event scene, like Pantoja when he beat Kai Kara France, like with G Silva when he beat Bryce Mitchell, like when Mauricio Ruffy beat Bobby Green and got that spectacular KO. And you've also got Caio Borrello, who's in a main event against Imavov, which is a 50-50 fight and a great main event. So you still have many Brazilians still doing really well. I just feel like they're in a phase right now where it's kind of a lot of the top guys who are Brazilian are slowly on their decline and on the way out. And you also have some other Brazilians who are on their way up, like the fighting nerds. But what do you guys think of what's happening with Brazilian MMA in the year of 2025? Let me know in the comments. Do you think that they're on a decline at the moment? Do you also think that they've been having some hard matchups? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching the video. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.